honouring the sacrifice of those who fought for our freedom on the 80th anniversary of the D-Day landings. At the precise moment on June the 6th, 1944, when Allied forces arrived on the beaches in northern France, a lone piper's lament.
At the going down of the sun, and in the morning, we will remember them.
The British Memorial in Normandy, remembering the fallen, where the King paid tribute to a remarkable wartime generation.
How fortunate we were, and the entire free world, that a generation of men and women did not flinch when the moment came to face that test.
At times emotional and full of pride, the last surviving veterans are being celebrated here, honoured in services and by thousands on the streets.
Marvellous. They're marvellous, all them, to stand here all this time and to shake hands with me.
And at the National Memorial Arboretum, those who couldn't make the journey to France joined commemorations. As world leaders also attended events here, a stark message from President Biden that the mistakes of the past should not be repeated.
Also tonight, urgent warnings about a UK-wide E. coli outbreak linked to mystery food and causing hospitalisations. The search for TV doctor Michael Mosley after he goes missing during a walk on holiday in Greece. And the full England Euro squad is finally revealed, but a couple of major players are off the list.
This is ITV Evening News with Lucrezia Millarini in Arromanches and Charlene White in the studio.
Good evening from Normandy, where the bravery and sacrifice of the D-Day landings has been honoured on a scale we may never see again. A handful of surviving D-Day veterans attended today's events here, which commemorated those who took part in the operation 80 years ago to liberate Europe. Among the world leaders taking part was the King, who spoke of his eternal admiration for the Allied soldiers who did not flinch when faced with the ultimate test. US President Joe Biden drew parallels with the current war in Ukraine and called for the world to stand together to defend freedom and democracy. And at the heart of it all were the veterans, many of whom may be here for the final time. Well, here's our Europe editor, James Mates, on a day of remembrance that will be remembered for generations to come.
First light, 80 years on, the beaches timeless, the weather perfect. It is part of the legend of D-Day that among the first ashore that morning was a lone piper, Bill Millen, who played unarmed and unprotected as his colleagues stormed the beaches. It's now an essential anniversary tradition. On the heights overlooking the eastern end of Gold Beach, a new British Normandy memorial, walls inscribed with the names of more than 22,000 dead, is the focus of British commemoration. Of course, the King, the Queen, the President and his wife were to take leading roles, but the honoured guests were these men and women, fewer and frailer each year, the last living witnesses of the day that changed Europe.
As we stand alongside their remaining friends and comrades on this hallowed ground, let us affirm that we will strive to live by their example. Let us pray such sacrifice need never be made again.
From the Prime Minister too, nothing but admiration for the character of those who fought here.
I'm no hero, they will say. I just did my duty. That humility is so much a part of why they are truly the best of us.
Many are too frail now to tell their stories, but today there were actors on hand to read their words. These from Joe Mines, now 99 and watching on.
I was 19 when I landed, but I was still a boy. I don't care what people say. I wasn't a man, I was a boy. And I didn't have any idea of war and killing. I was lucky. Yeah, I had lots and lots of luck. So why would I come back? Well, this is the last and only opportunity for me. The last there will ever be.
From Ken Hay, an infantryman on D-Day, now 98, these words can rarely have been more heartfelt.
Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. At the going down of the sun, and in the morning, we will remember them.
As the focus moved westward towards the American cemetery above Omaha Beach, President Biden's message to veterans was that remembering is as much about the future, about learning the lessons, as it is about the past. He had Ukraine firmly in mind.
History tells us freedom is not free. If you want to know the price of freedom, come here to Normandy. Come to Normandy and look. The price of unchecked tyranny is the blood of the young and the brave. In their generation, in their hour of trial, the Allied forces of D-Day did their duty. Now the question for us is, in our hour of trial, will we do ours?
Nowhere was the fighting harder or bloodier on D-Day than for the Americans on Omaha Beach, and it was on these sands that leaders from 25 countries gathered this afternoon. Prince William represented the King at the end of a long day. More surprisingly, Rishi Sunak chose to return home rather than stay for President Macron's big party. Ukraine's President Zelensky wasn't going to miss it. Ukrainians played a significant part in the Red Army's defeat of Germany on the Eastern Front. The fact that he is here this time, while Vladimir Putin's been excluded, says much about the parallels Western allies are seeing between then and now. The leaders were reminded on a big screen what had happened 80 years ago on the very beach where they were now sitting. For many of those who need no reminding, this may be their last visit to a battlefield that has defined their whole lives. The world has promised them that we will never forget, but who will hold us to that when they are gone? James Mates, ITV News, Normandy.
Well, you've just seen there was quite the guest list for today's set-piece event, but of course it was the veterans who took centre stage, and they were welcomed like rock stars, applauded and thanked everywhere they went. Well, Chloe Keedy heard from some of those who were still able to make the journey.
They have been on this journey for 80 years. Their unwavering determination to remember those that couldn't come with them was matched today in this French town, which was determined to honour them. In Arromanches, these men will always be heroes, the last surviving veterans of the D-Day landings, which ultimately led to its liberation from Nazi rule. In the town square, they had waited all day for this.
God bless you, sir.
Thank you.
98-year-old Albert Keir found himself being greeted in a number of languages.
Très fier, monsieur, merci. Très fier de vous voir, merci. Merci.
Thank you, sir.
But he couldn't possibly have mistaken their meaning.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much for everything you did.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Oh, they're marvellous. They're marvellous, all them. To stand here all this time and to shake hands with me. Yeah.
Were you expecting that?
No, no, not like this. Not as great as this. This is marvellous.
They're pleased to see you.
Yeah, yeah.
We are very grateful for the things they did. For all the things they did for us, for our freedom. Yeah. Yeah, it's true. They liberated Europe and we are very grateful.
It was emotional, and as I shook his hand, he held it tight, and I said thank you.
Today was about honouring the dead and the living, of which there are now very few. They were just teenagers when they came here, carrying the weight of the world on their shoulders, not so very much older than some of the children that waited to meet them today.
It's been overwhelming and everybody's been absolutely wonderful.
Has it brought back memories?
Definitely, definitely. Some not very happy, may I tell you, but it's been wonderful.
How could they possibly have pictured this when they arrived here 80 years ago? If this is the last time they come here, they leave knowing that this town will keep telling their story for generations to come.
Thank you, thank you.
And Chloe is down on the beach at Arromanches this evening. And Chloe, this year more than ever, people really treasuring the veterans who are here.
That's right, Lucrezia. It has been an incredibly emotional day here, and what has been a real mix of sort of sombre reflection and what now feels like a celebration. They say they are celebrating freedom. I don't know if you can see on the beach behind me, there are vintage jeeps driving around. There are people in costume, there's music playing. And up on the wall, people have gathered to watch a paragliding display that's been happening in the skies over our heads. We are standing on Gold Beach. 25,000 British troops came ashore here on D-Day. And yes, this week has been about honouring those that survived, the living, but also about remembering that a great many of those never made it home.
Of course, Chloe down at the beach in Arromanches. Thank you. Our Europe editor, James Mates, joins us now. James, there's so much to talk about today, but I really want to look more closely at that message, not just from President Biden, but also the King, that the mistakes of the past must not be repeated.
Yes, this was President Biden's big speech. You heard some of it in my report. It was a very, very strong speech in which basically he was saying, look, it's all very well all this talk about remembering, but we've got to learn as well, and drawing very clear parallels between the 1930s and the mistakes there that led to the need for D-Day and what's happening now. He said the battle between a dictatorship and freedom is unending. We will not walk away from Ukraine specifically, because if we do so, that means we would be forgetting what happened here on these hallowed beaches. Very, very strong words. The King, you would expect a bit milder, but he also said free nations must oppose tyranny. So a strong, strong message there. I mean, it's not unusual for current events to become involved in these celebrations. 10 years ago, when both the leaders of Russia and Ukraine were here, they launched what they called the Normandy process to try and bring peace after the invasion of Crimea. Now, we know that failed, but perhaps that makes it more extraordinary, actually, that the Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, left a bit early because they were all meeting here today. Now, I know they'll meet again at the G7 next week, and there's obviously an election on. But these opportunities for the leaders of the big countries to get together in a pretty informal environment and to talk about these major events, which clearly people like President Biden want to talk about, and President Macron as well, was maybe possibly a missed opportunity.
Yeah, well, James, thank you, and highlighting the hugely important diplomatic significance of the events today. James, thank you. Well, for the veterans who understandably couldn't make the journey here to Normandy, a special service was held at the National Memorial Arboretum in Staffordshire. It was led by the Duke and Duchess of Edinburgh and focused on the accounts of the veterans themselves. Stacey Foster was at the service and joins us from the Arboretum now. And Stacey, such an important event for those who cannot travel far.
Yes, and it was an important journey to make here to the centre of the country, to the National Memorial Arboretum in Staffordshire, which is a permanent memorial that celebrates lives lived but also commemorates lives lost in conflict. And many of the veterans said to me today it's their duty to come to things like this while they still can, to ensure we never forget. Families of veterans who are sadly no longer with us were here as well. Many travelled from as far as Canada and Australia. And unlike that day 80 years ago, the sun shone today as the Royal British Legion welcomed veterans and their families, but also members of the public.
They may not have been able to make it back to Normandy, but there was still an opportunity for those who sacrificed so much to remember together. 27 D-Day veterans were joined by the Duke and Duchess of Edinburgh for a service of remembrance. Alongside the usual military customs were stories of the men who came to the National Memorial Arboretum in Staffordshire, read by those currently serving in the military.
It's the 6th of June, 1944. My name is Tom Hill and I'm 18. I landed on the left on Saw Beach in the second wave at 7:25 a.m. The sights we saw going back and forth were terrible.
Men like Ralph McClure, now 97, who served in the Royal Navy ferrying tanks to the beaches.
Something like this takes me right back.
How important is it that we remember what happened that day?
To me, it's the, shall we say, easiest way of showing people what it was really like.
There was a minute's silence to remember those who didn't come back from France. Prince Edward then led a group laying wreaths. The eldest of the D-Day veterans in attendance was 104-year-old John Gillespie. He hopes events like this continue long after he's gone.
You don't have those occasions like today when people forget. In fact, the young people forget, and that's what you don't want the young people to forget. So it's very important that you do continue having those celebrations. And not celebrating a victory, or celebrating the problems they are of the world.
Freedom is the sunlight, brightening the way to tolerance and mutual respect.
The very young did have a role to play in paying tribute to the extraordinary men before them. They may no longer be able to make that journey back to France, but they are very glad to still be here to share their stories. Stacey Foster, ITV News, Staffordshire.
And tonight, beacons will be lit in towns and villages right across the UK in honour of all those who took part in the D-Day operation. If you'd like to know the nearest one to where you are, there is a full list on our website of where they'll be lit. Go to itv.com/news. But we'll have plenty more from Normandy a little later on in the programme, including I speak to the piper who played for the King about memories of his grandfather, a D-Day veteran. And the Royals' connection to D-Day and why it was so important for the King to be here today. But before that, Charlene will have the rest of the day's news from the studio after this short break.
Welcome back to the rest of the day's news now. And authorities in Greece are carrying out a search for TV doctor Michael Mosley, who's gone missing. Dr Mosley, who regularly appears on ITV's This Morning, disappeared after going for a walk on holiday. He'd been staying on the island of Simi near the coast of Turkey. Well, Martha Fairley joins us now in the studio with more on this. And Martha, there is real concerns about exactly what's happened to Dr Mosley.
Yes, there's a full search and rescue operation underway on the Greek island of Simi, involving drones, police, firefighters, civil protection teams, volunteers, a sniffer dog and a helicopter. Much of those assets have been sent across from the mainland or other islands. Now, 67-year-old Dr Michael Mosley is understood to have gone for a walk from St Nicholas Beach on the island, which is a popular destination for hikers and tourists. He left at around 1:30 Greek time yesterday afternoon and was reported missing several hours later by his wife Claire when he didn't return. A local community group posted this photo of him with an appeal for help to find him. Now, Dr Mosley is a regular guest on This Morning and is well known for promoting the 5-2 intermittent fasting and the Fast 800 diets. He's also made a number of documentaries about health and exercise and has a podcast series called Just One Thing, where he promotes small changes people can make to improve their health and well-being. It's reported he left his phone behind when he set off for his walk, and there are fears that he may have fallen from a height. But as yet, there is no indication of where he might be on the island.
OK, Martha, thanks very much. The UK's Health Security Agency is tonight carrying out an urgent investigation after revealing that more than 100 people have fallen ill in an E. coli outbreak, some of whom have had to be treated in hospital. It's thought many of the cases may be linked. Well, Ellie Pitt has joined us in the studio. And Ellie, this is affecting people right across the UK, isn't it? And the cases are expected to rise.
Yes, and that's because of the nature of the source of this outbreak of E. coli. We know that it's come from a food product or perhaps more than one food product that's distributed nationally, so sold right across the country. The UK Health Security Agency won't tell us more or be more specific about what exactly that food item is, because they say they don't know right now. They need to do more testing on that. But the reason that they've gone ahead and told us that there has been this outbreak, despite not being able to be specific, is because this strain of E. coli is the one that they're most concerned about in terms of what it can do to us. At the moment, we know there's been 113 cases and that a third of those have been hospitalised because of their symptoms. And those symptoms can include fever, vomiting, diarrhoea with blood in it. And the point is that those symptoms can lead to things like kidney function failure. Because they can't tell us what food to avoid at the moment, they're saying that hand hygiene is the best way to prevent the spread of this bacteria. And if you think you have symptoms, then call 111 or speak to your GP.
OK, Ellie, thanks very much. OK, to more health concerns now, and 3 more babies have died from whooping cough in England. It means 8 babies have now died from the disease since the start of the year. Pregnant women are being urged to make sure that they are vaccinated. Seeing a baby struggle with the cough can be distressing, so be warned that that is what we'll see at the start of this report from our health correspondent, Rebecca Barry.
Little Courtney, just 4 weeks old and struggling to breathe. She has a bacterial infection in her lungs, whooping cough.
There we go.
Eventually, Courtney recovered, but her parents wanted us to show this video to warn others, as it's been confirmed 3 more babies have died in England. For months, 10-year-old Florence was debilitated by the infection. She missed weeks of school, terrified about what would happen to her.
And you feel all achy all the time. I really thought that I was going to die. I wasn't getting sleep because I was thinking, am I going to die?
So far this year, there have been 4,793 confirmed cases of whooping cough in England. Each month, there's been a steep rise in cases, reaching 1,888 in April. So already, in just the first 4 months of this year, there have been 5.5 times as many cases as in the whole of last year. While 1 baby died in 2023, sadly, 8 babies have died so far this year. At Birmingham Women's Hospital, they run a drop-in vaccination clinic for pregnant women.
These are bouts of coughing where you cannot stop. If you are a newborn baby, your lungs are immature, so that is so much more dangerous. You become deoxygenated much, much faster, and there is a significant risk of brain damage and even death.
The NHS recommends that all women are vaccinated against whooping cough, but in recent years, uptake levels have fallen, with just 60% of pregnant women now getting the jab.
Do you mind coming through?
Salma is 20 weeks pregnant. This vaccination will pass immunity onto her baby girl until she can get her first jabs at 8 weeks.
Sharp scratch.
That will help my baby later on, so I want to protect my baby as possible as I can.
Experts warn it's vital to protect the most vulnerable. Rebecca Barry, ITV News, Birmingham.
At least 30 Palestinians have been killed in Gaza after an Israeli missile struck a school which was being used as a shelter. There are unconfirmed reports that women and children are among those killed. Israeli forces said the UN school was being used by Hamas fighters, and a warning that this report from our senior international editor John Irvine has some upsetting pictures of the aftermath of the attack.
The dead are covered by the blankets they slept under last night. Blankets that became their shrouds when they never got to wake up this morning. They are victims of a pre-dawn Israeli airstrike that ended up being yet another mass casualty event for Palestinians trying to find refuge from a war that never leaves anyone alone for long, regardless of their age. The bombs struck the top floors on one of the hundreds of United Nations schools that are now shelters for the homeless. The UN says 6,000 people were staying in this one. The Israelis claim that terrorists were among them. The IDF says it carried out a precision strike targeting a group of at least 20 Hamas and Islamic Jihad militants, some of whom had taken part in the sadistic rampage through southern Israel on October the 7th. Claims regarding the death toll vary, but it appears at least 30 were killed. The Hamas-run health ministry does not differentiate between combatants and civilians, but officials say 14 children and 9 women were among the dead. This young woman said it was around 3 o'clock in the morning when she heard 5 missiles hit the school. I went out running and found fire burning in 3 classrooms, she added. Last week, a firestorm killed at least 45 displaced Gazans after an Israeli airstrike close to a UN facility outside Rafah. Now another shelter has shown itself to be anything but a safe haven. In Gaza, you can run from the war, but you can't hide. John Irvine, ITV News, Tel Aviv.
Rishi Sunak and the Conservatives are under pressure tonight over the alleged actions of its biggest ever donor, Frank Hester. Fresh race allegations have been made about him in the Guardian newspaper. It follows remarks which emerged earlier this year where he said Labour MP Diane Abbott should be shot. Our political correspondent, Libby Vina, is at Westminster for us. Libby, the Conservatives are keen to draw a line under this, but new claims may make that difficult.
Yes, fresh allegations tonight about the behaviour of Frank Hester after an investigation by The Guardian. One suggestion that he said that a member of staff was a token Muslim and ridiculed others of Chinese origin. Now, we haven't heard any response from Mr Hester to those claims yet, but it comes on the day that it emerged that he is now the Conservative Party's biggest donor, having given the party £15 million. Now, in response to that revelation, Diane Abbott put a post out on social media saying that was an insult to her and all black women. You may remember the row in March when it emerged that Mr Hester had allegedly said that Diane Abbott wanted him to made him want to hate all black women and she should be shot. He admitted to being rude but denied he was racist. The Prime Minister was eventually forced to admit that those remarks, if true, were racist, but he didn't say he was going to give back any of the money. The Labour Party says this shows that he has no integrity. The Liberal Democrats say that he should give the money back. The Conservatives have only said today that they say that Mr Hester has apologised and that they believe that the matter has been resolved.
OK, Libby, thank you. Staying with politics, and climate change is one of the key issues among voters at the general election. The latest data perhaps shows why. Last month was the hottest May ever recorded right across the world. It's also the 12th month in a row that broken such heat records. Well, experts from Europe's Copernicus Climate Change Service, who did the research, say the results are alarming. So what are the main parties' pledges on the environment? Well, our science correspondent Martin Stew has joined us to talk through the details. Martin.
Well, Charlene, I'm actually going to start with a slightly bit of
Good news, the UK has actually dramatically cut emissions. They're down 50% from 1990. But to keep warming capped to 1.5 degrees, climate action trackers say we need to go even faster. That's the green line you can see here. Modelling shows current policies in blue are insufficient. In fact, the High Court ruled government plans are currently unlawful. So what are the parties planning to do? What are they promising? Well, the Conservatives and Labour are committed to reach net zero. That's where we don't emit any more carbon than the planet naturally absorbs by 2050. The Lib Dems and SNP by 2045, the Greens by 2034. At the other end of the spectrum, Reform UK, who want to scrap net zero targets altogether to save money, instead focusing on adapting. Next, let's look at energy sources, starting with fossil fuels. The Conservatives say granting new licences for oil and gas extraction from the North Sea is essential for energy security whilst we transition towards net zero. Labour won't revoke any approved licences but won't grant new ones. The SNP and Lib Dems will assess on a case-by-case basis. The Greens would cancel some, whilst Reform UK would fast-track new licences. On to nuclear energy. Well, the Conservatives, Labour and Reform are in favour. The Greens and SNP aren't. The Lib Dems aren't politically opposed, but they say it's too expensive to build new ones. And what about onshore wind? That is one of the cheapest forms of renewables, but it's often blocked by planning. Labour, the Lib Dems, Greens and SNP want to build more. The Conservatives would leave it up to local councils. Reform UK, though, are opposed. In fact, they would cut £10 billion of subsidies from renewables. Next, your car. A ban on the sale of new combustion engines was scheduled for 2030. The Conservatives pushed that back to 2035 for economic reasons. Now, Reform would ditch the ban altogether. Labour, Lib Dems and SNP are committed to 2030. The Greens say no new sales after 2027. And there are a myriad of other policies, from the Greens' pledge to rewild, the Lib Dems' mass tree planting, the SNP's bid to cut single-use plastic, and Reform UK's support for lithium mining. But what about the key difference between the two biggest parties? Well, the Conservatives would say they have a pragmatic and proportionate approach, which would see largely the same values, versus Labour's offering, which is GB Energy, a nationalised energy company designed to stimulate the green economy. Now, they have been criticised for dropping promises to invest £28 billion. But, Charlene, they do say even though they have limited the money, they are still more ambitious than the Conservative Party.
All right, Martin, thanks very much. Well, if you want to keep up to date on developments in the election campaign, today's episode of Talking Politics, The Election, has dropped. You can catch up on ITVX or download wherever you get your podcasts. We're going to move on to football now, and Jack Grealish and Harry Maguire are among the big names who've been left out of England's final squad for the Euros. Well, Sejal Karia is at Tottenham's training ground where the squad are preparing for tomorrow's friendly against Iceland. And Sejal, some surprises today.
Yes, Charlene, just over a week to go to the Euros, and tonight a blow to England's campaign with news that Harry Maguire will be missing from the squad after sustaining a calf injury in April, which he hasn't recovered sufficiently from. He has posted on X, formerly Twitter, to say he was devastated and that he was gutted. Now, Maguire has always been a mainstay of manager Gareth Southgate's teams, a player he has always put first on the team sheet, a player he has stuck with through thick and thin, and someone who has been an integral part of England's defence. And Gareth Southgate confirmed the news that Maguire has been left out in the last hour.
You know how I feel about Harry Maguire and what he's done for England and what he's done for me as a manager. The decision on Harry is totally about his physical condition, recovery from the injury. So there is no other reason. He's obviously one of our strongest centre-backs.
Now, also been left out is Jack Grealish. Southgate saying that there have been other players who have had stronger seasons. Now, England's first game will be on June the 16th, and that game will be against Serbia, kicking off the Euros for England.
OK, Sejal, thanks very much. Well, still to come on the ITV Evening News. We'll have the latest from Normandy at the end of remarkable commemorations for the 80th anniversary of D-Day. That's coming up after this very short break.
Hello again from northern France, where veterans, members of the armed forces and world leaders have joined thousands of people commemorating the 80th anniversary of the D-Day landings. Among the ceremonies here today was a poignant service of remembrance at the Bayeux War Cemetery in Normandy. It's run by the Commonwealth War Graves Commission, which does so much to keep the memories of those who died alive. And I'm delighted to say that joining me now is Vice Admiral Peter Hudson, who is the Vice Chair of the organisation, and Megan Maltby, one of the Community Engagement Officers. Thank you both for joining me this evening. Peter, let's start with you. We keep saying remarkable. Yeah. It's been a remarkable day. It's been a remarkable few days, but it really, really has, hasn't it? What stood out for you?
Well, it's been tremendous. I think with some of these events, people can say you can undercook, in which case you don't care. You can overdo them, in which case you're glorifying war, but striking that balance where you can recognise the significance of the D-Day event, when you recognise the sacrifice that thousands of people made, but also cherish the love towards the veterans, those men and women who fought. I just thought they've all been very beautiful events, and I've enjoyed being part of them.
We've had so much that's happened today. We had that very moving memorial earlier on where we heard that speech from the King. But even just before we came on air, we saw paragliders or parachutes landing on the beaches behind us. It's the scale of the event, and there's more to come, isn't there?
Well, there's more to come this evening. I think down on the beach here there'll be all sorts of reenactments and military vehicles and parties and all the way along. And of course, we complete, from the Commonwealth War Graves perspective, we've been lighting up all of our 20 cemeteries here in Normandy, and the last few will be lit up this evening. Local schools, local communities recognising the sacrifice of the men and women in their villages. So it rolls on, and it's been very well put together.
It's going to be an amazing sight. Megan, of course, at the heart of it all, it's the veterans, isn't it? And you know what? All of them who are here, they are determined more than ever to keep telling their stories, aren't they?
Absolutely. The veterans that I've had the pleasure of meeting over the past few days have been so engaged with all of the events and activities, so much enthusiasm, so much energy as well through the cemeteries, coming to visit some of their comrades who they lost 80 years ago.
And you know, it's part of your job, isn't it, to engage the next generation. How do we make sure that, you know, their stories, their experiences are never forgotten?
Part of our Legacy of Liberation campaign has really been about engaging that next generation with the work of the Commonwealth War Graves Commission, but also with those stories of those who didn't survive the D-Day landings and much of the fighting that took place beyond D-Day. So as part of this, we've been lighting torches across the UK and now here in Normandy to pass that torch of commemoration on from veterans to young people, really symbolising that being handed to the next generation who are all too ready to take that on and continue sharing those stories.
Let's hope so. And Peter, final question for you. That very emotional ceremony we saw at the British Memorial in Normandy, that wasn't even here 5 years ago.
5 years ago there was a vision of a veteran who said why it is that the British do not have a memorial, and the King referenced it this morning. And then an amazing effort by all sorts of people to bring it together in fairly short order, and it's such a moving, solemn, but also a very sort of respectful and joyous place that you can reflect on the work these people did to free Europe in 1944.
And it is all about that. It is about reflecting on that milestone in history. It's still going on behind us. We can hear it now. But Peter and Megan, thank you so much for talking to us tonight.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Well, it was the King who led the commemorations at the British Normandy Memorial this morning, his first official foreign visit since his cancer diagnosis. Well, later he opened a new education centre along with the Queen. And as our royal editor Chris Shipp reports, Charles was determined to do his bit to honour the heroes of D-Day.
The major anniversaries of D-Day do not come round very often. In his lifetime, the King has attended 7 of them here in Normandy, and he had no intention of missing this one, above the beaches where British troops landed and many fell. However his doctors had to treat his cancer, it could not, the King told them, get in the way of him making this moment of remembrance. And that determination, said the French President to the King, had not gone unnoticed.
Thank you, Your Majesty, for your word and your presence. I think it means a lot.
He is not someone who easily accepts that kind of advice. Are you telling me I can't go, or are you saying, sir, I'm not sure that you perhaps should? If it's the latter, he goes.
You can tell this man he's forbidden from going to other events, but you can't easily get him out of the one he was permitted to attend. So for 90 minutes, he and Queen Camilla chatted, heard the stories, and held the hands of those who were here 80 years ago, but might not get back to these shores much more.
Our ability to learn from their stories at first hand diminishes, but our obligation to remember them, what they stood for and what they achieved for us all, can never diminish.
There are plenty of events the King could have gone to on the Normandy coast today, and in normal times he would have tried to get to as many as possible, but his doctors drew the line at just that one ceremony, and that meant for the first time since his cancer diagnosis, Prince William was officially called upon to stand in. So when 25 presidents and European royalty gathered at the American landing beach Omaha, it was the Prince of Wales who took his father's place and was welcomed like a head of state by a head of state. Getting the King and Queen to Normandy was the mission his doctors were set. His slimmed down visit is a reminder of the King's health limitations right now, but also how for some events they can be overcome. Chris Ship, ITV News, Normandy.
Well, our Europe editor, James Mates, joins us again. And James, you said it earlier, didn't you? Every year the veterans fewer and frailer than before. Are we likely to see anything like this again?
Will this go on when the veterans are gone? I think that's your question. And given that by the 90th anniversary, the youngest will be 107, 108, I don't think even they would think that's an unfair question. You know, I definitely think it will, for one very good reason. What you see in our coverage is obviously heavily about the veterans and about political leaders. But what you don't see so much of is that there are thousands of people here, many quite young, most with no memory of the war, many with no memory of the family members they're honouring, but they come here with the stories of people who died or who fought and survived. They come with their photographs, they come with their memorabilia. It's a really, really important day for them, and that will carry on. And of course, for the French, this is a day of national liberation from a brutal dictatorship, brutal occupation. So they do this every year, not just in years with a zero on the end. And so they will be back for the 90th. They'll be back after that for the centenary. I won't, sadly, but I hope to be watching. This will go on, I'm sure, and the messages will be just as important.
James, let's hope so. Thank you. Well, finally, there's been many people here today who've been remembering those who are no longer with us. And for Lance Sergeant Dougie Warren, there was some added poignancy. The Scots Guard played a solo lament during the wreath-laying ceremony near Gold Beach, and he did it on his late grandfather's bagpipes, which hold a special place in his heart and a part of the history of the D-Day landings. Well, I spoke to Dougie a little earlier, and he told me about that and what the day meant for him.
To say it was an honour would be the very definition of an understatement. You know, so that is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, and I was proud to do it.
Dougie, you're actually carrying a piece of history with you, aren't you? Because these were your grandfather's pipes.
They certainly were, yes. There are a set of 1930s Mackays that he bought from Inverness just before the war, and he had them on the day with him in his day sack.
And now they're back here in Normandy on such an amazing event. How does that make you feel?
Well, I'm immensely proud of these pipes. I always have been. I love playing them, and I always will. I've deliberately, taken them out to Iraq and Afghanistan with me, but it doesn't compare to being able to bring them back here to Normandy today.
Your grandfather was here 80 years ago, wasn't he? But he sadly died when you were just 4 months. But he told your grandmother some of the stories, and she's passed them on to you.
Well, we can't. No matter what, we can't let the stories die. The best way to do that is to ask everyone to ask their parents, you know, and grandparents. I guarantee I've got a personal story with the pipes and my grandfather, but I guarantee everyone has some connection. Whether they are getting the story second or third hand, doesn't matter. The story can live on through that way.
Lance Sergeant Dougie Warren speaking to me earlier, and that brings our coverage here to a close. 80 years ago today, more than 150,000 Allied troops landed on the beaches along this coast. 4,000 were killed by sunset and many more were injured. On the 50th anniversary, these beaches were filled once again as thousands of veterans came for the first major event to remember the fallen. And 10 years on, they returned with royalty, although fewer veterans than before. And at each major anniversary, those who could have come back, with their numbers dwindling with the passage of time. Well, this may be the last time we'll see commemorations on this scale, and as the years go by, remembering what the veterans did becomes all the more important. They don't forget what happened, and neither should we. From all of us here, goodbye.
I will awake in the morning if you call, and I'll stand beside you as long as I can. I will hold back the evening of your sun, but I won't crumble with you if you fall.